when you say blew your mind, and I ask you about your emotional range, did you ever have emotions that you wouldn't feel at home, or intensities that you wouldn't feel at home?
Well, I pretty much grew up as not being a particularly religious person. My parents were Lutherans, but we were sort of Lutherans because we liked the social life and the coffee of the church more than we actually believed in all of the things of the church. And so when I would go to places such as Varanasi, where you are tramping around in the mud and they're cremating people on the banks, and you pass by lingams and all the other sort of these extremely ancient, fundamental religious objects, you start getting imbued with the atmosphere of the place. And the same thing happened with Mount Sinai, and the very same thing happened with the women. The women of the Dani that I met had these incredibly beautiful, elaborate bags that they had knitted together, and they were just gorgeous. And the bag was like any mom in the West who has to carry around diapers and pacifiers and bottles and all that stuff. So they would have uh, a pig and a baby and food all in this one bag together that was attached to their head and flowed behind them like a ceremonial wig. And you would start developing a spiritual interest in the sort of day-to-day life of these people and what rituals. For example, I sent you a picture of what happens when someone in your tribe dies. The women coat themselves with a yellow powder and they chop off a piece of their finger, and that's what all the women have to do as part of mourning. Well, I don't think chopping off the finger is necessary, but this yellow pigment that they use to coat themselves with is really striking and amazing, and they sort of look like ghostly apparitions.
In connection to what you said, am I right in recalling that when you talk in your book about, I think it's Machu Picchu, you use the word sacred, and
Mm,
it doesn't seem to be. It stands out in the book because it doesn't seem to be a word you use very often.
right. So um, there are certain vistas that just knock you out, and the only word really that fits is sacred, and Machu Picchu is one of them.
Okay, we're talking about curiosity and the role of curiosity in travel. Have you always been curious since childhood, or did your curiosity develop later somehow with some kind of influence or breakthrough? And when did you notice your own curiosity, and why?
So I grew up in a very drab suburb in Houston, Texas, sort of like a place of strip malls and shopping malls and cars and parking lots and this kind of thing. And and when I was a tween, maybe 13 or 14, I was introduced to the artwork of Andy Warhol. And I looked at it, and right after I looked at it, I was in a supermarket, and I realized if you have the right attitude, you can turn this into an aesthetic experience. And by looking at his soup cans and Brillo boxes and all this other stuff, I realized that all you needed was a change in perspective, and you could have an entirely different experience. And I'll never forget there is a they still sell these. There's a can of black olives, and the front of the label is a hand in the shape of a claw, and on the tip of each finger is a black olive, which is such a weird idea to make you want to buy these olives, but there it is, and it must be working. They're still doing it. So by doing that, you all of a sudden open yourself up to a completely different kind of experience, and you can transcend the limits of your own existence. So that's what I think curiosity leads to.
And the moment for you, as you described, was in terms of aesthetics. And you mentioned Andy Warhol, and then later as an editor and a major book publisher, you were interacting with Andy Warhol.
Yes, it was very exciting. So this is like one of my heroes from my childhood. And when I came to New York City, and became a book editor at Harper and Row. The first person I signed up was Laurie Anderson. I don't know if you know who that is. She's a performance artist, and her husband was Lou Reed from the Velvet Underground. And then I signed up Robert Wilson, the theater director, and then Philip Glass, the composer, and then Andy Warhol. So within a couple of years of moving to New York City, I was sort of already living my New York dreams. And my favorite Andy Warhol story is we were sitting at a nightclub. We'd been invited to a nightclub opening, and people always think he was such a big nightclub person. And we would spend 20 minutes at a nightclub, so it was almost like a job. So we're all tired, and we're all sitting at this little table and chairs, and we don't like this nightclub. And all of a sudden, the chair next to us rattles, and we look up, and it's Sting. And this is 1980 Sting, when he was quite a huge star. And then the other chair rattles, and it's Bob Dylan. And Andy Warhol leans over to me and says, "Can you believe who we're sitting with?" So he was very different from what most people think. He was not this cold, cynical person. He was like a little.
Mm. And wow, what a powerful moment to be there with this accident of these three people coming together while you're there.
Yes.
Yeah. Um, if you were to teach children, and you've mentioned you have an 8-year-old daughter, this kind of life of curiosity, how would you do it, or what wouldn't you do?
Well, I think the first exotic travel desire I had was I must have been like 8, maybe 8, and I started learning about Japan, how they had these lanterns made out of paper, and they had this special box for eating lunch, and they were had sliding paper doors in their house. And when you came in the house, you took off your shoes and you put on these other shoes. And this entire sort of ritual of 1950s, 1960s Japan obsessed me. And all I wanted to do was to live like a Japanese person. And so what you do is you try and find something that kids get obsessed about. Like one of my friend's grandkids, he is obsessed with cats. When he found out I have 2 cats, he couldn't wait to come over and meet these cats. And so you just follow up with that, with their passion for things, into saying, well, do you want to learn about the history of cats? Do you want to learn where these cats come from? Do you want to learn how cats became pets? You can spin out their obsession with something into a search for a rabbit down the rabbit hole sort of knowledge of that thing. And that, I think, is the fundamental of curiosity.
Yeah. Wow. And Rabbit Down the Rabbit Hole reminds me right away of Alice in Wonderland, a novel by Lewis Carroll. And that seems to have been a novel written through Carroll's curiosity to incite the curiosity of kids.
Yes, absolutely. I think it's quite an amazing piece of work. And it seems like no one really writes these kinds of books anymore with all this made up language. It's almost like a predecessor to Tolkien in a certain way, with the use of made up language and I think both of them are I know Tolkien was much more of an academic than Carroll, but I think both of them are putting themselves into the mind of young people to write those books.
Going down the rabbit hole. And what was it about the mind of the child they saw that inspired them?
I think there's a certain age of children, and it's before teenagers. It's somewhere between 6 and teenage, where they're just amazing. That they just do incredible things, and you think, where did they get that? Like one time, my niece and I were staying at a house on the river, and her favorite thing to do was go on rafting rides down the river. And I said, "Shall we go rafting right now, just you and me?" And she said, "Oh boy!" And she jumped up and she did the hula. Where did she know how to do a hula? And and so at a certain point with kids, there's some incredible flexibility going on in their mind, and that's the time to get them all excited about learning new things. I think.
So, do you think that you were someone who didn't lose that curiosity of a child?
Yes, for good and ill, I'm very in touch with my inner child.
What's ill about it?
Um, well, I can blurt out things that pop in my head, like ideas get bored in my head and they escape through my mouth. And some of those I should not let escape through my mouth because some of them are not things other people would want to hear at that moment.
Maybe they should hear it, you know. Um, there actually is some research into this about children, and it's tied to being able to document the number of questions that children ask. And there's quite a bit of research about that. And from what I understand about this, um, the ability of children to ask questions declines the longer they spend in the education system. You know, that it declines in public school kids, it declines more than that in high school kids, it declines more than that in undergraduates, it declines more than that in postgraduates. Some and that that data on how many questions or what type of questions children asks allows one to understand what's happening with curiosity with children.
Yeah. I also think that people learn in different ways. And if you get in the education system that teaches in a way that you don't enjoy learning, you're almost doomed, right? So, for example, I love to read, and I don't have a, because I live in New York, I don't have a car. So I would probably love audiobooks if I had a car. But since I don't, I always want to get the reading version of something. And people are always giving me audiobooks as presents, but I never really want to listen to them because I'd much rather just read the thing. But many people are not like that, and probably they would have gone much further in their education if they had been offered audiobooks instead of having to read. So and there's there's like this nonstop argument over the best way to teach reading, which is whole language versus phonetics, and this has been going on since when we were children, you know, so many decades ago. And I think that's the fundamental issue with education, that you need to find how someone gets educated.
Well, I have to agree with you, and I pick up on what you said. You know, I taught in a university for 25 years, and you said that basically one of the problems you see is the education system doesn't allow younger people to follow their interests, to follow their curiosity. You know, it imposes on them, in a sense, what they should know and what they should be asking about. And you know, so I couldn't agree with you more um, on that. Your career in publishing houses, where you were an editor at major publishing houses, and you interacted with some intriguing people who were original and creative, and that kind of interaction could be another form of travel, traveling between minds. So, you've already mentioned that story from your childhood of the aesthetic experience, breakthrough for you and curiosity in terms of Andy Warhol's art, then of your you know, interacting with Andy Warhol as a publisher, and the list of names I gave of others, and it was only a short list: John Lennon, the Rolling Stones, Orson Welles, Robert Evans, David Lynch, Philip Glass, Rita Mae Brown, William Shatner. So my question about that is, did that interaction with these creative and curious people, did that affect you or change you, or was it already an extension of your personality, um, you know, as an editor? And who would be your number one example of those you interacted with as an editor who are an epitome of unusual curiosity?
So, and the normal job of a book editor is to become friends with agents and to convince them to send you things, and it's sort of passive. And I didn't really like that right when I started. So, what I would do is I would get in touch with people who weren't really in the book publishing community and say, I think you're really interesting. Would you like to do a book? And then I would sort of put the proposal together for them, and I convinced the publisher to pay them enough to want to work with me. So that's how I signed up almost everyone. And so with Warhol, the thing that was amazing to me about him was that if you gave him an idea, he did it. He did every single idea that anyone ever gave him. And so, and in fact, the last picture he did was my idea. It was a picture of Neil Armstrong on the, yeah, Neil Armstrong on the moon. And I said, why don't we do great moments in American history that we pull off the TV screen and use that as the basis of the silk screen? And that was the last picture he ever did. But it isn't even that amazing that that happened, because any idea that anyone had, he would try. He literally would try every single thing anyone told him, and it was quite incredible to see someone, because he made movies, he had a magazine, he had a TV show, he did these paintings, he did portraits to bring in money. He had this entire business going on in all these different ways and all these different things, and it was quite astonishing to see that. So it's exciting to work with these fascinating people and see how they work and how driven they are and how much work they do and how passionate they are about their life. And me too.
And so that influenced you?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Almost every person I've worked with who I admire, who are famous, they work like dogs. And I work like a dog too. So it's almost like 99% perspiration. I think Edison has a line about this, right? 99% perspiration. I believe that's true. It's nonstop perspiration.
Hmm. So it's really interesting to hear that story about you, that you went out and found these people and brought them in. So in a sense, you were a headhunter.
Exactly.
Okay. Um, when you finished the travel for your travel book, did you feel finished personally with the experience of travel, or did you want to continue?
Oh no, I'm still doing it. I haven't done it recently because of I was very sick. I had when I got COVID, it attacked my central nervous system, so I was very sick for a number of years because of that. However, right before that happened, I joined on the Trans Siberian Railroad from Moscow to Ulaanbaatar, and that was spectacular. So I'm still doing this.
Why can't you stop traveling?
Because it's why it becomes it's a great hobby. My only problem now is that I'm a little bit iffy on wanting to do uncomfortable things. At 71, I'm not so interested in doing uncomfortable things. So that's why I wasn't that disappointed when Madagascar didn't work out, but I think I'm going to go there eventually anyway.
So, how could you write another travel book that isn't simply a repetition of your first one,
I can't and I won't. I won't write any other book at all. I'm retired.
but you're still traveling? You're not
Yes.
retired from traveling.
No, I'm retired from writing about it.
Okay. Well, keep on trekking, and I hope you make it to Madagascar.
Okay, thank you, Professor Thompson, for a wonderful time.